with as many people as you can, and we can't. And it's not fun. It's weird not to get together.
Friends, it's me, Meri. I warmly welcome you to Starspill USA. And today I tell you a story not in broken fragments, but as one long flow. Because Meri Brown's life deserves to be narrated in the sweep of a single tide. Beginning in the early 1970s, when she was born into a conservative and deeply religious family, the sort of household where children were taught to obey their elders, to hold tightly to the values of faith and loyalty, and to imagine their futures not as individual dreams, but as roles within a wider community. And for Meri, this upbringing created both a sense of purpose and a subtle weight upon her spirit. For although she was gentle, sensitive, and deeply empathetic, she always carried the feeling that she was destined for something beyond the narrow walls of her childhood home. Yet, as with so many young women of her generation, her path soon converged with that of a man whose charisma, charm, and confidence seemed to promise both safety and excitement. A man named Kody Brown, who burst into her life when she was just 19 years old. A man who carried himself with the assurance of someone convinced he was meant for greatness. Who spoke of spirituality and family with a fervor that impressed Meri, and who seemed to embody the future she had been raised to believe in. And so in 1990, she became his wife, walking down the aisle with hope swelling in her chest, her white dress shimmering, her eyes shining with the expectation of romance and loyalty, and her heart convinced that this was the beginning of a fairy tale marriage, though fate would prove otherwise. Because shortly after their union, Cody revealed that his vision of family did not rest upon the idea of one man and one woman bound exclusively, but rather upon the principles of polygamy, a system he described as sacred, spiritual, and destined to create a vast household filled with love, children, and support. And Meri, young and eager to please, already deeply in love with him, persuaded herself to accept his vision, convincing herself that perhaps sharing her husband would not mean losing him, but instead would mean gaining sisters, expanding her circle, and strengthening her faith. Though within her heart, an unease was already whispering, a warning that would echo for decades. In time, Cody courted and married Janelle, a practical woman with a career-focused mind, whose presence immediately shifted the balance within the family. Followed by Christine, cheerful, family-oriented, eager to be a mother many times over. And though Meri attempted to adjust, to smile, to welcome these women as sisters, her heart was quietly breaking each time she realized that her husband's attention, once solely hers, was now being divided. Yet nothing wounded her more than the arrival of Robyn, a younger, modern, and emotionally savvy woman who seemed to capture Cody's affection completely, becoming not just his partner, but his favorite, the one he praised, defended, and eventually married legally, even asking Meri to divorce him so that he could adopt Robyn's children. And Meri, torn between humiliation and duty, agreed, an act of sacrifice that left scars she could not easily conceal. Alongside this betrayal came the sorrow of infertility. For while her sister wives bore child after child until Cody's brood stretched into double digits, Meri gave birth only once, to her beloved Leon, once known as Mariah. And though she cherished her child with every fiber of her being, she could not ignore the silent judgment that surrounded her in a culture where motherhood was celebrated through quantity, leaving her feeling marginalized, pitied, even irrelevant within her own family. And as the years passed, Cody's treatment of her grew ever colder, at first subtle, then brazen, until on national television, he declared that he had never truly loved her. Words that cut through 3 decades of loyalty like a blade, followed by insults disguised as suggestions, telling her she might as well live in a barn, as though she were livestock rather than a woman who had given her youth to him. And though Meri bore these humiliations with outward calm, inside she sank further into despair. A despair that would later manifest in the loneliness of a catfishing scandal where, desperate for affection, she was deceived online by someone she believed to be a man offering her the kindness she lacked at home, only to discover it was a cruel trick, a humiliation that deepened her depression and made her the subject of ridicule among viewers and even her own family. The years that followed were marked by isolation, by weight gain, by a gradual fading of her once bright spirit. Yet through it all, some ember of resilience remained, a small flame that refused to be extinguished. And slowly, painfully, she began to rediscover her worth, finding strength in solitude, in small ventures such as her bed and breakfast, in quiet moments with her dog, and in the affirmation of fans who reminded her that she was more than Cody's neglected wife. Until eventually, after more than 30 years of emotional exile, she walked away, divorcing him in 2023 and relocating first to Utah and then exploring new horizons. Shedding nearly 50 pounds, lightening her hair to a fresh blonde, altering her wardrobe, embracing her independence, and posting boldly on social media about living her truth, refusing to let critics or Cody himself dictate her path, stating that she would stand in her power, that she would no longer accept anything less than respect. And slowly, courageously, she began to enter the dating world again. Not recklessly, as Christine did, but carefully, intentionally, making clear in interviews that she sought not just a partner, but the right partner. Someone who would see her worth rather than diminish it. Someone who would walk beside her rather than trample her spirit. And when Cody, in a moment of hypocrisy, offered to walk her down the aisle should she ever remarry, she firmly rejected the notion, reminding him and the world that he had no place in her future happiness. A moment that thrilled those who had watched her suffer for so long, for it signified that at last she had closed the door on his control. And now, at 54, Meri is unrecognizable from the 19-year-old bride who once gazed at Cody with devotion. For she is leaner, bolder, her blonde hair shining like a crown of reclamation, her business ventures growing, her travels expanding, and her outlook refreshed, embodying not the broken woman viewers pitied for years, but an independent figure who knows her value. And though mystery still surrounds her moves, whether she will settle permanently in Utah near her bed and breakfast, whether she will embrace Las Vegas where she launched her Worthy Up symposium, or whether she will pursue love in a new city altogether, what is certain is that she has transformed suffering into strength, humiliation into independence, and despair into hope, proving that among all the women once tied to Kody Brown, she is perhaps the one who has changed most profoundly. And for that reason alone, her story remains the most compelling, the most inspiring, and the one that truly deserves to be at the center of attention. Not merely as a subplot in Cody's ongoing dramas, but as a testament to resilience, reinvention, and the unyielding power of a woman who finally chose herself after decades of being made to feel invisible. The story of Meri Brown's painful unraveling with Kody Brown after more than 3 decades of sacrifice, misplaced loyalty, and endurance is not simply the tale of a failed marriage, but rather a labyrinth of emotional trials, complete betrayals, and quiet strength that together shaped a woman who entered polygamy as a wide-eyed 19-year-old and emerged 30 years later as someone scarred yet ultimately empowered to reclaim her life. And in order to fully understand the gravity of her journey, one must go back to the beginning when Meri, captivated by Cody's youthful spiritual charisma, allowed herself to be swept into a union in 1990 that promised companionship, family expansion, and a shared vision rooted in faith, only to discover that her husband's dream of polygamy was far less about building a balanced, harmonious household and far more about feeding his own need for control, admiration, and endless validation. For while she initially embraced the concept of sister wives and even supported Cody's decision to bring Janelle and Christine into the fold, what unfolded over the years was a slow erasure of her own identity, as her husband, once tender and engaged, became increasingly dismissive and often cruel, wielding his authority like a weapon and leaving Meri with less and less of the affection she had once assumed was the foundation of their marriage. By the time Robyn entered the picture in 2010, Meri's position as the first wife was already weakened. Yet the arrival of this fourth partner accelerated her descent into invisibility. For Cody's attention to Robyn was immediate and total, as if the years he had spent with Meri and the others were mere stepping stones to the love he claimed to have finally discovered. And from that point forward, Meri's role in the family seemed more symbolic than real. Her voice diminished, her presence tolerated rather than cherished. A painful reality made all the more degrading by the fact that it played out on national television with millions of viewers watching her heartbreak unfold season after season. Kody's cruelty was not always explosive, but often cutting in its casualness. Like when he declared on camera that he had never loved her. A statement so callous and dismissive, it stunned both fans and family alike. Or when he suggested she should move into a barn as though she were an unwanted burden rather than a wife of 30 years. Remarks that not only undermined her dignity, but also served as stark evidence of how little value he placed upon the decades of devotion she had given him. And yet perhaps the deepest wound came in 2014 when, under the guise of protecting Robyn's children, Kody urged Meri to legally divorce him so he could marry Robyn and adopt her kids. A decision that left Meri not merely sidelined but erased in the eyes of the law. Her marriage reduced to a spiritual footnote while Robyn was elevated to legal wife. And though Meri complied, no doubt believing that her sacrifice might somehow restore favor in Kody's eyes, the result was nothing but further alienation, culminating in the public spectacle of him discarding his wedding ring and effectively burning away the last visible token of their union. A gesture so symbolic of disregard that even the most loyal Sister Wives fans were appalled. And then, when Meri's loneliness became unbearable and she sought companionship online in 2015, the cruel twist of fate that led her into the arms of a catfish only magnified her humiliation. For instead of finding solace, she was deceived, manipulated, and ultimately exposed in a scandal that not only left her heartbroken, but also a target of gossip, ridicule, and suspicion, with even her fellow wives questioning her judgment. While Kody responded with little more than cold detachment, as if her pain were her punishment for daring to look elsewhere for the affection he had long since withdrawn. In the aftermath, she spiraled into depression, her body bearing the weight of her sorrow as she gained pounds and carried the exhaustion of unending rejection. Yet she still appeared for filming, still plastered on a brave smile, and still endured the endless cycle of neglect. A testament both to her resilience and to the grip that emotional dependence can hold over someone who has been conditioned to believe their worth is tied to endurance. But as the years rolled towards the COVID-19 pandemic, something within Meri began to shift. A gradual awakening sparked by the realization that Kody's disdain was not a reflection of her failings, but of his inability to value her. And this awareness, though painfully slow in its arrival, became the seed of her eventual liberation. When Christine boldly announced her decision to leave Kody in 2021, it was as if a veil lifted, showing Meri that the choice to walk away was not only possible, but necessary for survival. And when Janelle followed suit in 2022, the pattern became undeniable. Each of the wives who had been sidelined, ridiculed, and dismissed by Kody was finding her way to independence. And Meri, who had perhaps suffered the most acutely, finally found the courage to follow, making her decisive break in January 2023. A moment that marked not just the end of a marriage, but the reclamation of her own soul. For after more than 30 years of being the butt of family jokes, of hearing her husband deride her worth, of living in the shadow of Robyn's ascendance, Meri Brown chose herself. And in doing so, she rewrote her narrative from that of a discarded wife to that of a woman reborn. Her strength now visible in her refusal to accept Kody's belated offers of involvement, such as his ludicrous suggestion that he might walk her down the aisle if she remarried, which she rejected outright with a firmness that revealed just how far she had come, though her journey through despair, humiliation, and betrayal had been agonizing. It also forged within her a resilience and clarity that now defines her every step forward, making her transformation not only the most remarkable of all the sister wives, but also a symbol of endurance, survival, and self-discovery for women who have endured similar patterns of neglect and emotional abuse. And as she continues to rebuild her life, investing in new ventures, reclaiming her health, experimenting with her appearance, and re-entering the dating world with caution and discernment rather than desperation, it becomes clear that Meri's second act is not merely about survival, but about flourishing, about embracing the fullness of her identity without the suffocating weight of Kody's shadow. And in that sense, her post-divorce rebirth stands as one of the most compelling arcs not only within the sister wives saga, but within the wider narrative of resilience. Proof that even after decades of diminishment, a woman can rise, redefine herself, and live a life that is authentically her own. And yet, even as Meri stepped into that decisive moment of freedom, the shadows of her past did not simply vanish overnight. For 3 decades of psychological conditioning, spiritual guilt, and the invisible scars of neglect are not so easily erased. And in the quiet of her own thoughts, she still had to contend with questions of how she had endured so much for so long. Questions that often plague those who have lived within unhealthy dynamics. And although outsiders might quickly judge her for staying, what few truly understood was the depth of manipulation, the subtle power structures, and the way in which Kody's voice had been allowed to dominate the family narrative, leaving Meri not only isolated but doubting her own instincts. So when she finally broke free in January 2023, it was not just a divorce, but the painstaking peeling away of layers of guilt and shame, the reclaiming of a selfhood that had been buried beneath years of belittlement. The transition itself, however, was not marked by bitterness, but by an almost startling grace. For rather than indulging in open revenge or descending into the kind of messy feuds that reality television so often thrives upon, Meri channeled her energy into subtle reinvention. And this reinvention became visible in nearly every aspect of her life: her physical health, where she committed herself to a fitness journey that saw her shed nearly 50 pounds over 2 years; her personal style, where she boldly dyed her hair blonde and embraced a wardrobe that signaled vitality and modernity rather than the frumpish invisibility of the past; and her public persona, where she began to speak not with the halting, hesitant tones of a wife seeking approval, but with the confident cadence of a woman who had learned that her worth was not contingent upon any man's attention. And yet, the poignancy of her evolution lies not only in these external changes, but in the profound internal shift that accompanied them. For she began articulating in her social media posts a philosophy of self-acceptance and resilience. Most notably in an inspirational note she shared in January, where she declared her intention to continue standing in her power, to live in her truth, and to resist the corrosive effects of criticism. Words that may seem simple, but that carried extraordinary weight given how often she had been silenced, diminished, and belittled by the very man who once vowed to protect her. And it is in this insistence on authenticity that Meri's transformation gains its deepest resonance. For she has become not only a figure of fascination for Sister Wives viewers, but also a beacon of strength for countless women who see in her journey a reflection of their own struggles. Still, one must acknowledge that her path has not been without controversy, as critics often accuse her of projecting an image of resilience that may mask lingering vulnerability. But this too is part of the authenticity she embraces, acknowledging that strength does not preclude scars, that empowerment does not erase pain, and that even as she rebuilds, she is still navigating the complexities of life after a long and destructive relationship. This navigation extends into her approach to love, where she has chosen a path of deliberate caution, refusing to rush into commitments as Christine did with David Woolley, and instead articulating clear standards for any future partner. Standards rooted not in desperation, but in self-respect. And in interviews with outlets like Us Weekly, she has made it plain that she seeks a relationship built on mutual support and genuine satisfaction, a stark contrast to the hollow union she endured with Cody. And though speculation about her romantic life swirls constantly, particularly after she posted a moving day photo with her friend Brandon, sparking rumors of a new romance, Meri has remained playfully evasive, teasing her followers without surrendering her privacy, a tactic that both fuels curiosity and preserves her sense of control over her narrative, something she was long denied while bound to Kody's dominating personality. Indeed, this preservation of narrative control has become one of the hallmarks of Meri's rebirth. For even as the Sister Wives cameras continue to capture the broader dissolution of the Brown family, Meri's story increasingly feels like one that could stand alone, Her ventures such as Worthy Up and her limitless symposiums signaling not only entrepreneurial ambition but a commitment to cultivating empowerment among other women, as if to transform her private suffering into public strength, a mission that resonates strongly with those who have watched her endure decades of belittlement. Yet despite her independence and newfound direction, the ties to the past linger in subtle but undeniable ways. For as long as she shares a child with Cody and remains tethered to the broader Brown narrative, she cannot fully sever herself from the man who diminished her. And so the question lingers, is Meri's rebirth truly complete? Or is it still an unfolding process in which each decision, each boundary, each refusal to yield to Cody's belated gestures of involvement becomes a brick in the wall of her autonomy? And perhaps this is the very essence of her story that, unlike Christine, who seemed to vault quickly into a new marriage, or Janelle, who remains in a space of unresolved ties, Meri's journey is not about swift resolutions, but about slow, deliberate reclamation. The kind of healing that does not announce itself in grand gestures, but in the quiet, persistent commitment to never again allow herself to be treated as expendable, invisible, or unworthy. And as viewers of Sister Wives anticipate new seasons and speculate on whether the ex-wives will continue to participate in the show, many argue that Meri's arc has become the most compelling of all. For in her suffering, endurance, and eventual transformation lies not only the most dramatic character development, but also the most relatable human truth that even after decades of mistreatment, a woman can rise, redefine herself, and craft a life that is authentically her own. A truth that resonates far beyond the confines of reality television and into the broader narrative of resilience and survival. Following on from the place where her resilience and her deliberate reclaiming of narrative power left her at the end of that long and arduous stretch, Meri Brown's story enters what I would call the stage of Renaissance. For once, she had not only declared her independence from Cody, but also demonstrated her capacity to thrive without him. The next phase of her journey naturally became one of rebuilding her world in ways that had long been denied to her. And it is here that the full breadth of her transformation becomes even more visible. For she was no longer content simply to stand apart from Cody's shadow, but actively sought to shape a new identity built upon confidence, creativity, and personal growth. And in doing so, she showed that her separation was not an ending, but rather a beginning. The outward manifestations of this renaissance were, of course, visible in the physical changes she embraced: her striking weight loss of nearly 50 pounds, not only a reflection of renewed health, but also a symbol of the emotional baggage she had shed. Her blonde hair and refreshed wardrobe, a clear departure from the muted, subdued figure audiences had become accustomed to, but more profoundly, they were revealed in her professional and emotional choices. As she threw herself into ventures like Worthy Up and hosted events such as her Limitless Symposium in Las Vegas, where she gathered like-minded individuals to discuss empowerment, authenticity, and resilience, themes that so clearly mirrored her own lived experience that it was as if she had transformed her private suffering into a public mission, determined that no woman who had endured neglect or disrespect should ever feel alone. At the same time, she carefully navigated her personal life, refusing to rush into romance, yet allowing just enough glimpses of possibility to fuel speculation. As in the much-discussed Instagram post where she posed happily with her friend Brandon against the backdrop of a U-Haul on moving day, a photo that prompted fans to flood her comments with curiosity, praise, and even teasing suggestions of a wedding. And though she playfully deflected these questions, her decision to tag Brandon and her evident joy in the image spoke volumes about her willingness to embrace companionship on her own terms rather than according to Cody's dictates. A point underscored when she firmly rejected Cody's bizarre offer to walk her down the aisle should she ever remarry, dismissing the notion with the clarity of someone who understood that her future would never again be linked to his presence. And alongside these moves, there was the practical reality of her shifting geographical landscape. For having left Flagstaff for Parowan, Utah, she once again found herself preparing to relocate. hinting at a possible permanent move to Las Vegas, where her business ventures seemed to resonate most strongly, while simultaneously maintaining ties to her beloved bed and breakfast Lizzie's Heritage Inn, which she insisted she would never part with despite fan speculation. This balance of holding on to meaningful roots while daring to expand into new territory encapsulates the essence of Meri's post-divorce chapter. For she was not erasing her past, but integrating it into a future that was finally defined by her own desires rather than by Cody's decrees. Yet even amid these ventures, the shadow of the Coyote Pass dispute lingered, with Cody still entangled in arguments over land that he once used as leverage against his wives, and Meri signaling a readiness to confront him legally if necessary, a stance that highlighted her newfound boldness. For this was not the Meri of old who accepted humiliation in silence, but a woman prepared to fight for what was hers, to demand fairness where she had once been denied it. And in all of this, one perceives a striking contrast with her fellow ex-wives. For a while, Christine appears determined to showcase her marriage to David Woolley as a picture of reclaimed happiness, and Janelle continues to oscillate between independence and nostalgia for what once was. Meri has emerged as the most dramatically altered, the most willing to step outside the frame of Cody's orbit and craft something wholly new. And this is why, in the eyes of many, she has become the unexpected star of the Sister Wives saga's later seasons. Her confessionals crackling with a mixture of hard-earned wisdom, humor, and defiance. Her presence now commanding rather than apologetic, and her future brimming with the kind of possibility that once seemed unimaginable during the long gray years of neglect. Indeed, whether she ultimately settles in Utah or Las Vegas, whether she chooses to remarry or remain content in singledom, whether she continues filming or withdraws entirely from the reality television spotlight, the essential truth remains that Meri Brown's journey, marked by catfishing scandals, humiliations, weight struggles, loneliness, and eventual liberation, has crystallized into a narrative of resilience so compelling that it arguably deserves to be the centerpiece of the franchise itself. For it embodies not only the drama fans tune in for, but also the deeper human message that no matter how long one has endured disrespect, reinvention is always possible, dignity can always be reclaimed, and life beyond betrayal cannot only exist but thrive in ways more fulfilling than ever imagined. Meri's steady transformation in this third act of her life can be likened to the rebuilding of a grand old house after years of weather damage. For she was no longer merely patching up broken beams or covering cracks with paint as she had once done when she clung desperately to Cody's approval. Instead, she was reconstructing her foundations from the ground up, shaping a future whose walls were fortified with self-respect and whose windows let in the clear light of autonomy. And this new edifice of identity became increasingly visible in the small but telling ways she carried herself in public and on camera. Where once she had sat on the edges of couches, shoulders hunched, smile hesitant as though afraid of being dismissed, now she leaned forward, laughed with abandon, and spoke without waiting for permission. A marked change that audiences immediately recognized and applauded. And though cynics claimed that this newfound boldness was simply a survival tactic to maintain her place on a show threatened by waning interest, the sincerity of her words, the raw edge of her voice when she recalled the humiliation of Cody, telling her bluntly that he no longer desired a marriage with her, convinced most viewers that what they were witnessing was not performance but genuine liberation. And this liberation found fertile ground in her entrepreneurial pursuits, where she devoted herself not only to Lularo, a business some dismissed as controversial yet, which had provided her with financial independence when Cody offered none, but also to the careful nurturing of Lizzie's Heritage, in which she spoke of with a tenderness that revealed its role not merely as a business, but as an anchor to family history, a living connection to her ancestors and a symbol of continuity amid the chaos of broken plural marriage. And in promoting the inn, she did not shy away from sharing its story in podcasts, interviews, and live streams, each time reinforcing the idea that she was now the sole author of her own narrative. Simultaneously, whispers about her personal life refused to fade, For every smiling selfie with friends, every candid glimpse of companionship stirred speculation that she might have found love again. And while she kept her lips sealed on the matter, her refusal to deny outright gave fans the impression that she was content to let curiosity bloom, a strategy that cleverly allowed her to control the narrative without sacrificing her privacy. For after years of her private life being dictated and displayed by Cody, she had learned the value of keeping certain truths hers alone, even as she teased just enough to keep supporters invested. But beyond her own choices lay the constant backdrop of the broader Brown family drama. And here too, Meri distinguished herself, for she resisted the temptation to descend into pettiness or open warfare with her fellow wives. Instead, carving out a stance of measured independence she would no longer chase. Robyn for friendship after years of cold rejection. She would no longer allow herself to be baited into rivalries with Christine or Janelle. Yet she also refused to retreat into bitterness, choosing instead a dignified neutrality that spoke volumes. For in refusing to expend her energy on battles no longer worth fighting, she redirected it towards growth. And nowhere was this more evident than in her responses to Cody's ongoing struggles with Coyote Pass, where while Janelle remained tangled in disputes over access to land and Christine had already sold her portion to cut ties entirely, Meri stood firm in her intention to claim what was rightfully hers, not with the pleading of old, but with the legal clarity of someone unafraid to fight. And in this, she embodied a lesson that resonated far beyond the Sister Wives fan base, namely that even when robbed of years of respect and agency, one can still draw a line, reclaim dignity, and insist on justice. And thus, as cameras continue to follow her, capturing moments of laughter, moments of strength, and occasional tears when reflecting on the decades wasted in a loveless marriage, Meri's story coalesced into something larger than reality television, for it became an allegory of rebirth, a testament to the capacity of the human spirit to endure humiliation, betrayal, and neglect, and yet emerge not broken but radiant. And in this sense, her renaissance stands as both the conclusion of one chapter and the beginning of another, the closing of the Kody Brown era and the opening of a future whose pages she will write with her own pen. Pages she will write with her own pen. And though no one can yet say whether those pages will include a new marriage, a permanent move to Las Vegas, an expansion of her inn, or perhaps a quiet withdrawal from public life, what can be said with certainty is that Meri Brown has achieved something rarer and more profound than mere survival. She has achieved renewal. And in doing so, she has not only secured her place in the hearts of viewers, but also etched her name indelibly into the ongoing story of resilience. Proof that no matter how deep the wounds, a woman's strength can build a future brighter than the past she leaves behind.